Welcome to Classic Storytime Hub. Tonight, we unravel one of the most chilling tales ever written, The Monkey Paw by W. Jacobs. But beware, what you're about to hear is not the story as you've always known it. This is a reimagined narration, reshaped with suspense and cinematic tension. A cursed talisman, 3 wishes, and consequences darker than fate itself. Outside, the night clawed at the windows, cold, wet, and restless. But within the snug parlor of Laburnum Villa, the fire roared defiantly, painting the walls with flickering gold. At the table, father and son bent over a chessboard. Mr. White, reckless in his play, drove his king into danger with a gambler's grin. Moves so perilous they drew a quiet shake of the head from Mrs. White, knitting serenely by the hearth. "Listen to that wind," muttered Mr. White, trying to mask his blunder on the board. "I hear it," Herbert replied, eyes locked on the pieces. His hand moved with certainty. "Check." A pause. Then, with finality, mate. Mr. White slammed his fist against the table, frustration spilling out. "This cursed place, roads drowned in mud, paths like swamps, and yet they expect us to endure it." His wife's gentle voice cut through the storm of his words. "Never mind, dear. Perhaps you'll win the next game." Herbert smirked, exchanging a sly glance with her. Mr. White caught it, and his anger melted into a sheepish grin beneath his gray beard. Suddenly, the gate clanged shut outside. Heavy footsteps crunched toward the door. Herbert leaned forward, excitement in his voice. "He's here." Mr. White hurried to greet the visitor. Moments later, he returned with a towering figure, broad-shouldered, eyes sharp, face ruddy from years abroad. "Sergeant Major Morris," he announced. The soldier settled by the fire, whiskey in hand, his presence filling the room. By the third glass, his eyes gleamed, and his voice carried them far away, to battlefields and plague-ridden lands, to strange faces and stranger fates. The family listened, spellbound, as the storm outside raged on, unnoticed.
21 years, Mr. White murmured, glancing at his wife and son. When he left, he was barely more than a boy in the warehouse. Now look at him, seasoned by the world. Mrs. White smiled politely. "He doesn't seem much the worse for wear." The old man's eyes gleamed with restless longing. "I'd like to see India myself, the temples, the fakirs, the jugglers, just to wander, you know." Sergeant Major Morris shook his head, setting down his empty glass with a weary sigh. "Better where you are." His tone carried the weight of things best left unseen. Mr. White leaned forward, curiosity sharpening his voice. "You mentioned something once. A monkey's paw, wasn't it?" The soldier stiffened. "Nothing worth repeating," he said quickly, almost too quickly. "Monkey's paw," Mrs. White echoed, her voice tinged with intrigue. Morris shifted uneasily. "A trinket, a bit of magic, perhaps." He spoke carelessly, but his eyes betrayed caution. The family leaned closer, their interest piqued. The soldier's hand fumbled in his pocket, and at last he drew out a small shriveled relic. He laid it on the table, a withered paw, dried and twisted like something mummified. Mrs. White recoiled with a grimace, but Herbert snatched it eagerly, turning it over in his hands. "What's so special about it?" Mr. White asked, taking the paw and laying it down before them. Morris's voice dropped, heavy with reverence. "A holy man, a fakir, placed a spell upon it. He wished to prove that fate governs all lives, and that those who dare to tamper with destiny will pay dearly. The charm allows 3 men, each to have 3 wishes." The room fell silent. Their laughter, moments before, now felt hollow, discordant. Herbert smirked, youthful bravado in his tone. "Then why not take your 3 wishes, sir?" The soldier's gaze hardened, the way age regards reckless youth. His blotchy face paled. "I have," he said softly. Mrs. White leaned forward, her voice hushed. "And were they granted?" Morris's grass tapped against his teeth. "They were." "And others?" she pressed. "Has anyone else dared to wish?" The soldier's silence was answer enough.
"The first man used his 3 wishes," Morris said at last, his voice low and heavy. "I never learned what the first 2 were, but the 3rd was for death. That's how the paw came to me." The words hung in the air like smoke. Silence fell, the fire snapping in the grate the only sound. Mr. White broke it gently. "If it's useless to you now, Morris, why keep it?" The soldier's eyes darkened. "Habit, perhaps, or folly. I once thought of selling it, but it's brought me enough misery already. And besides, people laugh. They call it a fairy tale. Those who believe want to test it first, then pay later." Mr. White leaned forward, curiosity gleaming. "If you could wish again, would you?" Morris hesitated, his face pale. "I don't know," he whispered. "I truly don't know." He dangled the shriveled paw between his fingers, then with sudden resolve hurled it into the fire. Mr. White cried out and snatched it back, clutching it to his chest. "Better let it burn," Morris said, his voice grave as a warning bell. "If you won't have it, then give it to me," Mr. White insisted. "I will not," Morris snapped. "I threw it away for a reason. If you keep it, don't blame me for what follows. Cast it back into the flames while you still can." But Mr. White only studied the talisman, turning it over with fascination. "How does it work?" he asked. "Raise it in your right hand, speak your wish aloud. But mark my words, the price will be paid." Mrs. White laughed lightly, breaking the tension. "It sounds like something from the Arabian Nights. Perhaps you should wish me 4 pairs of hands to finish supper." Her husband slipped the paw into his pocket, and the family's laughter rang out, though Morris's alarmed grip on Mr. White's arm betrayed no humor. "If you must wish, wish for something sensible." The paw was forgotten for the moment, as chairs were drawn to the table. Supper was served, and the soldier's voice carried them once more to distant lands, India's jungles, its temples, its battles, while the cursed relic lay quietly in Mr. White's pocket, waiting.
As the door closed behind Sergeant Major Morris, Herbert chuckled. If his tale of the monkey's paw is no truer than the rest of his adventures, we won't get much out of it. Mrs. White turned to her husband, her eyes narrowing. "Did you pay him for it?" "A mere trifle," Mr. White admitted, his cheeks coloring. "He didn't want it, but I pressed him. He warned me again to throw it away." Herbert raised his hands in mock horror. "Throw it away? Nonsense! We'll be rich, famous, happy. Wish to be an emperor, father, then mother can't boss you around." He darted playfully around the table, pursued by Mrs. White with a cloth in hand, laughter echoing through the room. Mr. White drew the paw from his pocket, staring at it with unease. "Truth is, I don't know what to wish for. I've got all I need." Herbert clapped a hand on his father's shoulder. "Then wish for £200. That'll clear the house, won't it?" Mr. White hesitated, then raised the talisman. His son sat at the piano, striking solemn chords, his wink to his mother betraying the jest. "I wish," Mr. White said clearly, "for £200.
At once, the piano crashed in discord. Mr. White cried out, dropping the paw. His wife and son rushed to him. "It moved," he gasped, staring at the thing with revulsion. "It twisted in my hand, like a snake." Herbert scoffed, lifting the paw from the floor. "I don't see the money, and I doubt I ever will." Mrs. White touched her husband's arm gently. "It must have been your imagination." But Mr. White shook his head. "No, no harm done, but it gave me a shock." They settled once more by the fire, pipes glowing in the dim light. Outside, the wind howled, louder than before. A door banged upstairs, and Mr. White flinched. Silence fell, a heavy, unnatural silence that clung to them until last the old couple rose to retire, leaving the paw on the table, waiting.
"Perhaps you'll wake to find the money stuffed in a bag at the foot of your bed," Herbert teased as he bid them good night, "with something monstrous perched on the wardrobe, watching you claim your ill-gotten fortune." Later, alone by the fire, he stared into the dying embers. Shapes flickered there, faces forming and dissolving. The last was grotesque, disturbingly simian, glaring back at him with a horror so vivid he shuddered. With a nervous laugh, he reached for a glass of water, but his fingers closed instead around the monkey's paw. A chill ran through him. He wiped his hand on his coat and hurried upstairs. Morning sunlight poured across the breakfast table, chasing away the night's unease. Herbert laughed at his fears, and the shriveled paw lay discarded on the sideboard, treated with careless disbelief. "All old soldiers spin tales," Mrs. White said lightly. "Imagine us listening to such nonsense. How could wishes be granted in this day and age? And even if they were, how could £200 harm anyone?" "Perhaps it'll drop from the sky onto Father's head," Herbert quipped, his grin irreverent. Mr. White frowned. "Morris said the things happen so naturally you might call them coincidence." Herbert rose, still smiling. "Well, don't spend the money before I'm back. I'd hate to see you turn greedy. We'd have to disown you." His mother laughed, watching him down the road before returning to the table, amused at her husband's credulity. Yet when the postman knocked, she hurried eagerly to the door, only to find a tailor's bill. Her mood soured, muttering about retired sergeant majors and their drunken tales. "Herbert will have more of his jokes when he comes home," she said at dinner. "I dare say," Mr. White replied, pouring himself a glass of beer. His voice dropped, grave and certain. "But for all that, the thing moved in my hand. That I'll swear to." "You only imagined it," Mrs. White soothed. "I tell you, it moved," Mr. White insisted. "There was no imagining, just—" He stopped, his gaze following hers. Outside, a man lingered at the gate. He paced back and forth, hesitant, as though wrestling with himself. His silk hat gleamed in the pale light, his suit too fine for casual business. 3 times he turned away. The 4th, with sudden resolve, he pushed the gate open and strode up the path. Mrs. White, flustered, slipped off her apron and hid it beneath a cushion, before ushering the stranger inside. He looked uneasy, his eyes darting, his hands restless. He listened absently as she apologized for the untidy room and her husband's worn garden coat. Then silence fell, thick, expectant. At last he spoke. "I was asked to call. I come from Ma and Megan's." Mrs. White stiffened. Her voice trembled. "Has something happened to Herbert? Tell me. What is it?" Mr. White tried to calm her. "Steady, Mother. Don't leap to conclusions.
Surely you haven't come with bad news, sir." His eyes searched the visitor's face with desperate hope. The visitor faltered. "I'm sorry." Mrs. White's cry cut through the room. "Is he hurt?" The visitor bowed his head. "Badly hurt," he said softly. "But he feels no pain." Relief surged through her. "Thank God," she whispered, clasping her hands. "Thank God." But the words died as the truth dawned. The visitor's averted eyes, the weight in his voice, she understood. Her breath caught, and she turned to her husband, laying a trembling hand upon his. The room fell into a silence so heavy it seemed the house itself mourned with them.
"He was caught in the machinery," the visitor said at last, his voice barely above a whisper. "Caught in the machinery," Mr. White echoed, dazed, the words hollow on his lips. He stared out the window, then clasped his wife's trembling hand, pressing it as he had in their youth, nearly 40 years before. "He was the only one left to us," he murmured. "It is hard." The visitor shifted uneasily, coughing as he turned toward the window. "The firm wishes me to convey their deepest sympathy for your loss," he said, his back to them. "Please understand, I am only their servant, obeying orders." Silence pressed down on the room. Mrs. White's face was ashen, her eyes wide and unblinking. Mr. White's expression was grim, the look of a soldier bracing for battle. "Ma and Meggins disclaim all responsibility. They admit no liability, but in recognition of your son's service, they wish to offer compensation." Mr. White dropped his wife's hand and rose, horror etched into his features. His lips cracked dryly as he forced out the words, "How much?" The answer came like a death knell. £200. Mrs. White's shriek tore through the air, but her husband did not hear. A faint smile flickered across his face as he reached out blindly, like a man stumbling in darkness, then collapsed, senseless, to the floor. 2 miles away, in the vast new cemetery, the old couple buried their son. They returned to the house steeped in shadows, silence clinging to them like a shroud. It had all happened so quickly they could scarcely believe it, and for days they lived in a strange expectancy, as though something else must follow, something to ease the weight crushing their hearts. But nothing came. Days stretched into weary resignation, the hopeless kind that people mistake for apathy. Words between them grew rare. There was nothing left to say. One night, about a week later, Mr. White woke suddenly. He reached across the bed and found it empty. The room lay in darkness. From the window came the sound of quiet, broken sobs. He sat up, listening, his heart heavy with dread. "Come back to bed," Mr. White whispered tenderly. "You'll catch the cold." "It is colder for my son," Mrs. White answered, her voice breaking as fresh sobs racked her. Her weeping faded into the silence. The bed was warm, his eyes heavy, and Mr. White drifted into uneasy sleep until a sudden, piercing cry jolted him awake. "The paw!" she screamed. "The monkey's paw!" He sat upright, alarmed. "Where? What is it? What's wrong?" She stumbled toward him, her face wild with grief. "I want it. You haven't destroyed it, have you?" "It's in the parlor, on the bracket," he said, bewildered. "Why?" She laughed and sobbed at once, clutching his cheek with trembling hands. "Why didn't I think of it before? Why didn't you?" "Think of what?" he demanded. "The other wishes. We've only used one." His voice rose, fierce and trembling. "Wasn't that enough? "No," she shouted triumphantly. "We'll use another. Go, fetch it. Wish our boy alive again." Mr. White threw back the bedclothes, his limbs shaking. "Good God, you're mad!" "Get it," she panted, her voice breaking. "Get it quickly. Oh, my boy, my boy!" He struck a match, lighting the candle with unsteady hands. "Go back to bed," he pleaded. "You don't know what you're saying." "We had the first wish granted," she pressed feverishly. "Why not the second?" "A coincidence," he stammered, his face pale. "Wish!" she cried, trembling with excitement. He turned to her, his voice shaking. "He's been dead 10 days. I could barely recognize him by his clothing. If he was too terrible to see then, what now? Bring him back," she screamed, dragging him toward the door. "Do you think I fear the child I nursed?"
He descended into the suffocating dark, groping his way toward the parlor. The paw lay waiting on the mantelpiece, and as his fingers closed around it, a sickening thought seized him. What if the wish, unspoken yet burning in his mind, summoned his broken son before he could escape? Sweat chilled his brow. He stumbled blindly around the table, hands scraping the wall until at last he found the passage. The talisman pulsed in his grip, foul and heavy. When he returned, his wife's face was transformed, white, expectant, almost inhuman. He feared her. "Wish!" she commanded, her voice sharp as steel. "It is madness, wickedness," he faltered. "Wish!" she cried again. His hand rose, trembling. "I wish my son alive again." The paw slipped from his grasp, thudding to the floor. He stared at it, horrified, then collapsed into a chair. His wife, eyes blazing, rushed to the window and tore the blind open. He sat shivering, watching her silhouette against the glass. The candle guttered, shadows pulsing across the walls, until with a final flicker, it died. Relief washed over him. Perhaps the talisman had failed. He crept back to bed, and moments later she joined him, silent, hollow. They listened. The clock ticked. A stair groaned. A mouse scurried through the walls. The darkness pressed down like a weight. At last he struck a match, its feeble glow guiding him downstairs for another candle. But at the foot of the stairs the flame sputtered out. He reached for another match, when a knock came. Soft, stealthy, barely audible. The matches spilled from his hand. He froze, breath suspended, until the knock came again, louder, insistent. Panic surged. He fled back to his room, slamming the door. Then, through the silence, a third knock thundered through the house.
"What was that?" Mrs. White cried, bolting upright. "A rat," Mr. White whispered, his voice trembling. "It passed me on the stairs." But then the sound came again, louder, heavier, a knock that shook the silence of the house. "It's Herbert!" she gasped. She rushed toward the door, but her husband seized her arm, holding her back with desperate strength. "What are you doing?" he hissed. "It's my boy! It's Herbert!" she cried, struggling against him. "He's only 2 miles away. Let me go. I must open the door." "For God's sake, don't let it in," Mr. White pleaded, his body shaking. "You're afraid of your own son," she screamed, wrenching free. "I'm coming, Herbert, I'm coming." Another knock thundered through the house, then another. She tore herself from him and fled down the stairs. He followed, calling after her, his voice raw with panic. He heard the chain rattle, the bolt scrape stiffly in its socket. "The bolt!" she cried, her voice strained. "Come down! I can't reach it!" But Mr. White was already on his knees, clawing at the floor, frantic to find the paw. His heart pounded as the knocks grew into a furious barrage, shaking the very walls. He heard her drag a chair against the door, heard the bolt creak as it slid back. At that instant, his fingers closed around the talisman. With a desperate cry, he raised it and whispered his final trembling wish. The knocking stopped. Silence fell, though its echoes seemed to linger in the house. He heard her drag the chair away, the door swing open. A cold wind rushed up the staircase, biting through the darkness. Then came her wail, long, loud, filled with anguish and despair. He stumbled down to her side, and together they looked out beyond the gate. The street lamp flickered in the night, casting its pale glow on a road empty and utterly still.
And thus the story ended. If you liked this journey into the worlds of classic literature, do not forget to support us by subscribing so we can tell you more. And hey, if there's a classic tale you'd love to hear told in this suspenseful style, drop its name in the comments below. Your suggestion might be our next chilling adventure.